All right, let's dive into something pretty radical today. How to actually architect a company that has no bosses. Seriously, we're going to explore how lessons from things like ant colonies and even bacterial slime can help us build businesses that are more adaptive, more resilient, and, just more human.
So what can a bacterial colony teach a CEO? It sounds like a joke, right? But the answer, and I'm not kidding, it challenges pretty much everything we've been taught about management. We're trained to see companies as these big, complicated machines that we have to control. But what if that's the wrong metaphor? What if they're actually living systems that we need to, well, cultivate? Once you get that, everything changes.
And this slide just lays it all out perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the old way, the top-down, rigid machine. It was great for a stable, predictable world, but that's not the world we live in anymore. On the right is what we need now, the adaptive, fluid, decentralized organism that can actually thrive in chaos. The truth is, the machine is breaking down. It's time we learned how to grow the organism.
To figure that out, let's go learn from the true masters of self-organization, nature's own high-performance networks. I'm talking about systems that pull off these incredible feats of coordination without a single manager, without a blueprint, and definitely without a 5-year plan in sight.
So how on earth do they do it? Well, the secret sauce has a name. It's called stigmergy. Now, I know it's a fancy word, but the idea behind it is so beautifully simple. It's all about coordinating through the environment. So instead of talking directly to each other, individuals just leave clues in their shared space. And those clues guide what everyone else does. You can almost think of it like teamwork through graffiti.
And here's stigmergy in action. An ant doesn't get a memo from its boss. It just follows a super simple rule. Smell for a pheromone trail and follow it. The colony's collective genius emerges from 2 simple feedback loops. You've got positive feedback, which reinforces the good, short paths, and you have negative feedback, the fact that the pheromones evaporate, which erases old mistakes. No CEO needed.
And get this, it's not just about invisible chemical trails. In bacterial colonies, the environment itself becomes the management tool. They literally carve pathways into their surroundings that then guide how the colony grows. The workspace becomes the workflow. Now hang on to that idea because that is going to be hugely important a little later on.
Okay, so we've seen what these natural systems do. Now let's peel back the curtain and look at how they do it. Because these aren't just weird biological quirks. These are universal rules for creating order from chaos that apply to any complex system. Yep, including our companies. Now, I know this chart might look a little intense, but the big idea here is actually pretty straightforward. Self-organizing systems aren't magic, they're just physics. So think of a company. It takes in energy, things like money, talent, ideas. It uses that energy to create order, like products and services. And in the process, it exports disorder, like competition, out into the market. It's this constant, dynamic flow of creating stability through change.
Now here's a wild idea, and it's totally counterintuitive. In business, we spend so much time and money trying to stamp out every little bit of randomness, every error. But it turns out a little bit of noise, random experiments, weird ideas from left field, is actually essential. It's what lets a system explore and find better ways of doing things. An organization that is 100% efficient is also 100% brittle.
Which brings us to the big leap, from biology class to the boardroom. How do we take these incredibly powerful principles from nature and actually apply them to the way we work? Well, it all starts with a huge shift in what it even means to be a leader.
For the longest time, the manager has been seen as an architect. They design the machine, they drop the org chart, and they tell people exactly how to execute the grand plan. But in a world that's constantly changing, that just doesn't work. The new leader is a gardener. A gardener doesn't control the plants, right? They cultivate the soil. They make sure there's enough sun and water, and they create the conditions for healthy, amazing growth to just emerge on its own.
So how does a gardener lead, exactly? Well, one of their most powerful tools is something called minimal critical specification. Instead of writing a 100-page instruction manual, you define only what is absolutely essential: the goal, the boundaries, the why. You get crystal clear on what needs to happen, but you stay totally silent on how to do it. That space you create is where responsible autonomy is born.
Okay, at this point, you're probably thinking, this all sounds really nice in theory, but does this stuff actually work in the real world? Well, let's take a look. Let's look at some real companies that aren't just getting by, but are absolutely crushing it by running on these very principles.
So, let me introduce you to Bert's org.
They're a Dutch home nursing organization, and they have 14,000 employees. Just let that sink in. This is a massive company, and they deliver better patient care with higher satisfaction scores for less money than any of their traditional competitors.
So what's their secret? Get this. Here's the number that just blows my mind every time. They do all of that with 0 middle managers. 0. The entire company is a network of more than 900 small, self-managing teams of about a dozen nurses each. They handle their own clients, their own scheduling, their own budgets, everything. It's basically a giant network of tiny, autonomous companies.
And Bertzorg isn't some weird fluke. This chart shows how a few other amazing companies get to the same place using slightly different paths. You have Morningstar, a huge tomato processor that uses these peer-to-peer contracts. You have the video game giant Valve that uses these fluid, self-forming teams called cabals. The specific tools are different, but the core idea is exactly the same. Push authority and decision-making out to the edges of the network.
Okay, so we've covered the why and the what. Let's wrap up with the really practical stuff, the how. This isn't about just waking up one day and firing all the managers. It's about deliberately and thoughtfully building the right environment, an enabling infrastructure that allows this kind of self-organization to actually take root and grow.
And here they are, the 6 core actions. First, you break the big machine into small, modular teams. Then, you give them real autonomy using minimal critical specification. Third, and this is key, you build a transparent digital workspace. That's your modern-day pheromone trail. That's stigmergy. Fourth, you move from boss-led reviews to peer-based accountability. Fifth, you give people frameworks to help them make sense of the world. And finally, you make sure that incentives are aligned so that what's good for each person is also good for the whole team.
Now that 5th point about making sense of things, it's absolutely crucial. A tool like the Synephin framework helps teams figure out what kind of problem they're actually dealing with. If a problem is clear, great, just follow the checklist. If it's complicated, okay, call in the experts. But if a problem is complex, meaning you can only connect the dots looking backwards, you can't make a plan. You just can't. You have to run experiments, see what happens, and respond. And that right there is the home turf of emergence.
So let's end with this question to just chew on. Shifting your mindset from a machine to a living organism. It isn't just a simple reorg, it's a complete reimagining of what work can be. So ask yourself, if your organization were an organism, what would it really need to thrive? More control or more conditions for life to find a way? The answer to that question might just change everything.